programme, and I'm delighted, just to say from the outset, delighted to see you all in person. We haven't been doing too many in-person events until now, and it's really fantastic to be able to see people in the flesh. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Will Tanner. I am the director of Onward, and if you don't know what Onward is, you may be in the wrong room. But we are a relatively new centre-right think tank focusing on levelling up opportunity and strengthening community in every due to traffic, and we will hope that she has a full tank of petrol in her car. And our wonderful partners, Speakers for Schools, for helping us to put on this really important event at this vital time. Because we all know, you all know, that despite coronavirus being a disease which disproportionately affects older generations, younger generations have been hit particularly hard by some of the dislocation and suffering of the past year. We know that workers aged 16 to 25 made up 2/3 of people who lost their jobs up until March this year. We know that young people were more likely than any other generation to be furloughed. We also know that people at school or university suffered disruption to both their learning and to their exams, and the costs of that are significant, and the IFS has estimated that the school leavers may suffer around £40,000 in lost earnings over the course of their lifetime as a result of some of the lost learning of the last year. And finally, and we know this from our work at Onward, younger generations have been particularly affected by some of the mental health and well-being aspects of the pandemic. We did some research in June that showed that around 2/5, 42% of 18 to 25-year-olds said they were sometimes or always lonely in the previous week. That's a really substantial minority of younger generations affected by social isolation, and we know that the effects of that can be really vicious. It isn't all negative. The government has done an enormous amount to help. I'm sure our panellists will talk about some of those things, but just to mention a few: Kickstart, the furlough scheme, support through the Schools Recovery Fund, and indeed support for mental ill health. And as we emerge from the crisis, I think we have an opportunity to, quote-unquote, build that better for younger generations, to actually look on the bright side and find ways to support younger generations in new ways to strengthen them as we build back after the last year and a half. And that's what we're here to discuss today. I'm delighted to have this brilliant panel with me to discuss that. And I'm not going to give you all of their job titles because that would take too long. But in order that they will be speaking, I'm going to first turn to Andrew Bowie. Andrew is the Conservative Party's Vice Chair for Youth, someone who's been doing a huge amount of work to see how the party can reach out to younger generations, but also thinking about the policy implications for young people. I'm then going to turn to Rachel Saunders, who is the Education and Policy Director for Speakers for Schools, a charity I'm sure many of you know, providing inspirational talks in schools in order to help young people be inspired and go further. I'm then going to come to Jonathan Gullis, MP, who is a member of the Education Select Committee, a former secondary school teacher, and also, the best title of all, the author of an Onward report earlier this year, looking specifically at lost learning and the way in which different communities in different parts of the country have differential aspects to access to good schools. And then I'm going to turn to Sophia Bailey. Sophia is a Speakers for Schools Young People's Ambassador from Bristol. I'm sure she's going to talk a little bit about her experiences, and fantastic to have you here. Thank you for joining us, Sophia. And then after we've heard from those four speakers, I'm hoping that Gillian Keegan will have got through traffic and will be able to give her remarks. Gillian will be known to many of you as the Minister for Skills until about 2 weeks ago, someone who did enormous work driving apprenticeships, T-levels, traineeships in her previous role, and she is now the Minister of State of the Department for Health and Social Care, in charge of mental health and social care, so someone who can talk about both the labour market and the mental health aspects of this question. Now, we only have an hour.
See such an interest in what's a really important area. As Will said, I'm the Vice Chairman for Youth in the Conservative Party, which some people would describe as rather ironic position to hold given the average age of certain party members. But it's a huge honour to hold the position. It means that I'm responsible for everybody in this party under the age of 25. And we are actually, at the current time, sitting with some of our highest numbers of young Conservatives in the last 20 years. 20% of this conference are aged 25 or under. And that's an incredible testament to what we are doing as a party to reach out to young people, something that we haven't been doing for such a long time. But with this role, I have been very privileged actually over the last nearly 2 years now to at least once a week or so speak directly to young people out in the country and hear from them their experience of lockdown, the pandemic. Because as Will said, although this is a disease that adversely affects predominantly people who are of an older generation, the effects of lockdown, I think, have hit the youngest generation in this country. To go dating, I mean, everything stopped, right? And it was horrific. And so this government's got a huge responsibility because to protect, notionally one generation, as we were absolutely right to do, we took actions which adversely and overly affected a younger generation. And so we have a responsibility to that younger generation to get the next few years right in terms of the policies that we're going to be bringing through to support young people at school, in the workplace, at university. And if you ask me, are we getting it all right now, I'd be brutally honest with you and say, no, I don't think we are. We've got a long way to go. We're doing some great stuff. T-levels, apprenticeships, we're investing in the Schools Recovery Fund. This is all brilliant. But if you spoke to the average 18 to 25-year-old at this conference, or outside this conference, is this Conservative government delivering for you? I think the answer sadly would be a resounding no. So we've got much further to go, and I'm very keen to hear suggestions from the floor, from this panel, people who are much more expert in this field than I, so that I can then take that back to CCHQ, take it back to the party operation, and start feeding in some of these ideas. Because that's one of the other great things I get to do. So I get to talk to some of the best ideas about where we go next have come from 18 to 25-year-old members of this party. And as I said, it's a great privilege to then take those ideas who come unencumbered with any of the life experiences that me or Jonathan have. They're just fresh and just full of exciting new ideas for where we go as a country. And taking those ideas and passing them up to number 10 in party operations, getting the next manifesto, and start delivering for young people is a great element of my job, something that I've a huge privilege to do, and will be taken away from this session today. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's a brilliant way for us to begin this discussion, and I'm really struck by two things you said. The fact that you talked about this as a responsibility rather than just an opportunity, as an obligation for government to take this seriously. And secondly, just your brutal honesty that the party has perhaps not done enough in the past and has an opportunity to fix that in the future.
Well, I mean, it's self-evident. The average age that people start voting Conservative in this country goes up at every single general election. That's an unsustainable position for any political party to be in. So we are obviously not and have not been delivering for the younger generation. And as I said, with the responsibility that we have now to this younger generation, we have an opportunity to do that right.
Fantastic, thank you. Rachel, can I now come to you for perhaps a slightly different perspective, but I hope as optimistic a one as
I hope so, thank you. So I'm Rachel Saunders from Speak Schools, and what I'll do is just tell you a little bit about the organisation, who we are, and just why it's important for us to be part of this conversation. And I'll just say a little bit about some research that we published just the other day. Speak Schools has been going for about 11 years. Started, as Will said, founded by Rob Preston, who was being, ITV's Piz found that he was being invited all the time to give talks to private schools, but the state schools weren't even inviting him to come and speak, and having been to a state school himself, he felt very strongly that young people from all backgrounds should have the opportunity to meet people who are at the top of their game. So he set up the charity, and we have a brilliant speakers programme of impressive and exciting people who go around and speak to young people to inspire them in terms of their futures. Jason, who's here, has been the CEO now for a couple of years, and when the pandemic started, there was a really clear opportunity for us to build on what was previously a relatively small in-person work experience programme. So pandemic begins, it becomes really clear that young people are really at risk of missing out on opportunities which they would otherwise have had because of lockdown and everything else that's been happening over the last 18 months. So we rapidly scaled up a virtual work experience programme, and over the last year or so have delivered nearly 60,000 work experience placements for young people. So we got to the point as an organisation where we thought actually we were in touch with a really significant number of young people and their teachers, families, broader communities, and we have a real insight and an understanding into what's happening here, really powerful ability to have conversations which are important and which matter. And the more that we progressed down the route of undertaking this research, the more it became really clear that there is a young people's voice which really does need to be heard, because whilst we've already reflected on how extraordinary this time has been for young people, it's often us maybe reflecting back on how it might have felt for us where we're in that situation rather than actually hearing from young people themselves. So we started doing some polling, and then we did a number of in-depth semi-structured interviews, and what young people told us was actually there was a huge consensus in terms of the kind of support that young people need. So this was research with 11 to 18-year-olds, so secondary school age. They were really clear about wanting and needing academic support, but at the same time needing time outside the classroom to kind of recover from the extraordinary impacts of lockdown. So that balancing act of needing academic support, but also needing time with families and friends and other things, all the other things that everyone wants to catch up on. I remember one conversation with a young person saying, we all thought that by the summer we'd have our driving licences, but we don't. And it's just really simple, straightforward things when everybody looks forward to those kind of big rites of passage, and those freedoms and opportunities haven't necessarily been available to people. So academic support, super important. Mental health, really important. And what was really remarkable about the conversations we had is I think there's been a real step change in terms of how young people are able to speak between themselves about their mental health, and about how within classes or with teachers or within peer groups or in other places within work experience placements, young people are much more able to than my generation to reflect on their feelings and on how they're doing and what support they might need. But the problem is that when they then ask for support, it's not always there, and the services aren't always there to give them the support that they know they need. So reflecting on the vital importance of mental health, we've come a long way, but actually you do need to be able to get the service you need when you need it, and that's not currently the case, and that can lead to enormous frustrations for young people who have kind of been led to understand that this is something that they ought to ask for help for, but don't always get the help when they ask for it. But the third thing that came through really powerfully was work experience. So we asked young people what would help them feel confident about their futures and their future career, and we said things like, more CV writing help, or being confident there are enough entry-level jobs in your community. I thought that one would come up higher actually, and it did in a couple of regions. Particularly in Wales, actually, young people were nervous about whether there are enough entry-level jobs for them. But what came through most powerfully across all of the regions of England and most of the UK was that young people wanted meaningful work experience. And they told us what that work experience had to include. So they wanted to hear from senior leaders in the business as well as entry-level role models. They wanted the chance to practice essential skills like leadership, teamwork, problem solving. And they wanted to hear from the leaders of those organisations, and Josh is actually one of our youth ambassadors, might say something in a minute, but I remember really strongly, really clearly how powerful Josh spoke about, young people, almost all of them will feel like they have gaps in their learning from this time, however brilliantly the school has done and however hard you worked learning rightly, you'll feel like there's bits of the curriculum that you might not have covered that otherwise you would have had a chance to, and your qualifications aren't the same as qualifications in other years. You haven't necessarily had the chance to sit exams. So there's a real need, I think, for leaders in business and for politicians to say, actually, we understand that this has been extraordinary. We are going to support you, and it is going to be okay. We do get it, and you are not going to be underestimated or overlooked because your qualifications are different and because you've had gaps in your learning. And just the ability to hear from an employer or certainly a politician, just saying that I think is really powerful and really important. So one of the things that I didn't necessarily, so all of that was, you know, vitally important, and broadly what you might have hoped or expected to find in research like this, but important to directly hear it from young people. A couple of things that I didn't necessarily expect us to find. One was the extraordinary resilience of young people. So young people who hadn't been able to play sports as they normally would, but instead had gone jogging with family members. Or Josh actually is another example of somebody who wanted to, had a really clear career plan, planned to be an apprentice in the travel industry. Obviously that wasn't possible because no one was travelling. So instead he's gone on a college course, and rather than having an apprenticeship wage, he's working part-time in retail. I think that's an incredible level of resilience, and you know, the ability to make decisions very quickly, very late, in order to keep yourself on track and progress in the way that you had hoped. So that amazing resilience and adaptability is something to really celebrate. But the other thing which we found, which I think really can't be underestimated, is the sense of a gap in trust that needs to be dealt with. So enormous decisions were made on behalf of young people. They didn't feel like their voices were necessarily heard as those decisions were made, and they still are really concerned that their futures are not necessarily being, people really recognise the impossible choices that politicians have had to make over the last period. But there's a real sense that young people aren't necessarily being heard and listened to as those extraordinary decisions have, you know, balancing acts have been balanced, or choices have been made. So there's a real gap in terms of trust between actually young people and business leaders. They felt businesses could do more for them, but even more so between young people and politicians. And some of the real anger and frustration that came through was powerful and important, I think, to recognise as we move forward. I think the good news is that all of these things can be, it's straightforward to put in academic support. We can put in more support in terms of mental health. We can do more to provide work experience and support young people's ambitions. So if there is a trust gap now, it's really clear what we need to be seen to do in order to resolve it, I think, and to make progress.
Rachel, thank you so much. That was incredibly rich in terms of research and detail, and both on the practical steps that we can take, but also some of that kind of emotional or kind of trust-based question, which is actually in some ways less practical, but equally, if not more important. I'm now going to turn to Jonathan Gullis. Jonathan, you've seen this as a teacher, and now as a member of Parliament, you've grappled with some of these questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you, Will, and thank you all for joining us, like Andrew said earlier. If I start off by picking up probably on a few things actually Rachel said, which I thought were really strong. So my brother-in-law, Thomas, was due to sit his GCSEs in the summer of 2020. This is a young man who's worked really hard, maybe not the strongest academically, to get a pass for him was some sort of massive achievement. And basically what happened was that huge milestone, that opportunity to excel, that opportunity to show some self-worth for himself was stolen from him because ultimately he had to cancel exams. And whilst he did get passes in his subjects given to him, given something without earning it, really definitely has hindered him going forward, because there's that lost sense of identity. And I've seen that with him as we've been looking at college options, apprenticeships, and it's been a very painful process for him to sort of discover himself and who he is and where he wants to go going forward, and actually believing in himself that he is capable of going on to do fantastic things, because ultimately the ability to demonstrate that was taken from him. I think the mental health aspect is absolutely correct. I think that young people are extremely resilient, and I think that with mental health there is absolutely a broken system. I was a head of year for many years, trying to get someone into CAMS in Birmingham took at least 6 months, and that was if I was really lucky. And ultimately therefore shows there's a real broken system that needs fixing. But I think it's important we talk about mental health of young people, that we recognise that what happened just by some kids going back to school and being in a routine and seeing their friends has dealt with any social anxiety that was anticipated. That understanding of what a mental health problem is versus people who are being anxious or need support. I think we need to have that very distinguished conversation, because ultimately I think children are great. And there was even a report done that said 80% of the kids were very happy, with where they are and how they're doing. So ultimately the majority are in a good place. The challenge that the minister's joined us now, obviously, I don't know the minister, the minister's challenge is going to be about making sure those young people who are in most need, that 20% who really feel they need support, get that support as quickly as possible. As for work experience, what's happened in teaching from my own time there is the teacher has become the fountain of all, and it's just simply not fair and not correct. As a head of year, I make no shame in claiming I effectively felt like a social worker. I was filling in forms for the city council on a regular basis. I was trying to solve kids who needed access to food, kids who were in unsafe homes. You know, I'm contracted from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. I'd be lucky to leave at 6:30 in the evening. You know, if there was a fight that broke out outside the school gate, we're the first ones out there calling the police, reporting it, whilst then dealing with damage limitation of the reputation of the school. The teachers now, you know, we've got teachers being trained for mental health and they're spotting things, that's correct, but a teacher is not a mental health nurse, and we need to make sure that's distinguished. We're asking teachers to make sure that we're tracking very carefully if they think that kids are falling into county lines involved in carrying knives. Again, absolutely, teachers' responsibility is to try and safeguard it, but it's not their job to then try and get involved in actually tackling that issue. It's for the police or the social services to get involved as well. Teachers are trained in your PGCE or however you do it to teach and give knowledge in a specific subject area and impart that into a child. Everything else is an additional add-on. And whilst teachers always step up to the mark and do it, we can't expect, like with the work experience, the teachers will not have the time or expertise. I came straight from university into teaching. I have no idea what the business world is like. So I don't know how to write a CV for a private company because I've never worked in one of my public sector board my whole life. I've gone from being a teacher now into a member of parliament, paid for by the taxpayer. Thank you to all of you, by the way, who fund my salaries and pensions. You know, I don't have the expertise, I don't have the contacts in businesses, I don't understand an apprenticeship. When I went to school, apprenticeships were looked down upon, and I went to a private school. And the idea is if you didn't go to a top university, you didn't even make the honours board in some cases of your schools. I went to Oxford Brookes, which is obviously the deemed to the sort of the double one out of the two in Oxford. But I joke, obviously, like it is a great university. I had a great time there, and ultimately that's where we've got to have that mindset change. And if we go and think about it, whilst COVID has certainly harmed things more, I think it's also easy to forget that things weren't in a great place in areas that I'm proud to represent. Now I'm going to read off a few stats very quickly, but I represent Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove Talk. I'm mightily proud of my area. I don't like to talk negatively about it. I'm not doing this to talk my area down, but I also I think mature enough to accept the realities of what we're facing, which is we are in the bottom 20% for kids taking level 3 and 4 qualifications. Just about 50% of our kids leave at GCSE with a pass in English and maths. We've got no college, and actually the minister was obviously in this role. Our college wasn't good or outstanding, so therefore we weren't able to apply for an Institute of Technology, despite being one of the first cities to install gigabit and having Statue University, which is the leading video games university in the UK. That opportunity wasn't there. We've got a multitude of single academy trusts that basically are power bases for pale and stale, same old rearguard action of defending what they've done time and time again, and actually mediocrity has been accepted, and there's a poverty of aspiration, I think, from certain multi-academy trusts within Stoke-on-Trent that don't aspire for the kids to do more. And literacy levels, the average reading age of Stoke is reportedly around 9 to 10 years old. 12% of our workforce don't have any qualifications. The national average is 4%. So you can imagine that I've not just got adults now losing their jobs in the factories and the warehouses because they've got no formal qualifications. It's the situation that lies in front of them. However, and again, I always want to talk positively on my area, we've just got an Education Challenge Board from the Department for Education, so we can actually hold a trust to account via the local authority area. We are the first Stoke-on-Trent for jobs growth in the United Kingdom last year in 2020. We built 1,000 plus homes in 2019-20, 97% of which were on brownfield land. We're the 8th fastest growing economy in England, which includes London. And we have, as I say, Statue University, the UK leading video games university, and we installed gigabit under budget for a government project, which I think is a remarkable thing. £600,000 of your money went back into Treasury because we've managed to deliver something under budget. So, and then we've even got a free school through Way 14. I'm hoping to get one in Way 15 to bring some of the best external multi-academy trusts into our city to literally ruffle feathers. I make no secret, I'm desperate for Catherine Burblestein from Michaela to come and really ruffle some feathers and upset some head teachers in my area. She has my full support to do that. And then finally, we got £7.5 million for a Middlehurst school, a school that's been closed down, rotting away in Packmore, that now is going to be rebuilt in a new special educational needs school, part of a really good multi-academy trust. So there's lots of positives that are coming on. I suppose the things I would tie off to end with, you know, as Andrew said, we've had a £2 billion kickstart scheme, 126 million being invested into work placements and training for 16 to 24-year-olds. Obviously the apprenticeship schemes, employers were getting £3,000 for taking on and apprentice, and we've got obviously things like the National Career Service, 32 million that's going to till March 22, which is going to deliver careers advice to 500,000 people. There's some really positive things that have come out of this. But I implore you all, this is a shameless plug, to read the report I did with Onward and New Schools Network about recovering from the pandemic, levelling up education. We've got Francesca, I see over there, who's one of the key authors of that piece of work. We always need to remember her because I get to put my name to something that she did all the heavy lifting for us. But some of the key things that we've done with that report to help improve education, because one of the things I find ironic as being a teacher was teachers sitting in a room talking about what young people want. And look, I'm 31, but I promise you I'm much older in my head really. I have no clue what young people want, but what we can do as adults is we know when a system's not working, when we can fix things. So like Rachel said, and we're going to hear from Sophia, let's listen to young people about what they want, and then let's have a conversation about what we can do with the systems to try and help towards that. But if we don't disagree respectfully and explain why that simply will not work. Having that so things like, to make schools better, I introduced a 10-minute rule bill. Let's inspect multi-academy trusts in terms of the board of trustees. I've got support from Labour, Liberal Democrats and Conservative members of Parliament. It's not contentious. And any good trust of a multi-academy trust shouldn't fear this. Because if you're doing the right things, then you're fine. Funding for maths, like good maths, to take actually over underperforming schools. Giving teachers a bonus if they go, an outstanding teacher moves from one area, let's say London, the South East, where they're clustering, to the North East, where it's desperately needed, to make sure they're giving the very best education. Give them a 10,000 bonus after 3 years if they continue to produce outstanding results. And then finally, actually looking as well at a scheme which is run by the Challenger Trust, where we maybe take pupil premium, we ring fence it specifically to make sure it doesn't get spent on building things, gets spent on the children who need it, in a £150 voucher for extracurricular activities for that school to invest within local groups, so ultimately kids are getting out of the classroom. And in Stoke, we have an abundance of forest schools. Those opportunities for kids in inner cities to actually experience what it's like to make a campfire, to camp out, to live that sort of rural lifestyle, does so much for their mental health, their socialisation, and their understanding of the world outside their area. Because in Stoke, we're very parochial. So getting someone from Burslem to Smallthorne, which is a 5-minute walk, is like a 500-mile journey in some cases. So that's the challenge we have there.
Jonathan, thank you so much. That was a tour de force, and the thing that just struck me was just the sheer level of ambition that you have for your place. And if nothing else, that what you just said and what you just articulated demonstrates exactly why having ambitious Conservative MPs in places like Stoke-on-Trent may well deliver real gains before the next election and help deliver the agenda. So, thank you for being with us, and thank you for setting that out with such force. It was really, really powerful. Can I now come to Sophia? Really interested. I suspect you're going to say some very different things to Jonathan, but I'm really interested in what you have to say.
Thank you. So my name is Sophia, and I'm proud to be able to sit here in front of you today and be the voice for so many students throughout the UK and tell you as best as I can how COVID-19 has affected us and what we wish could have happened to better support us. If you ask anyone studying for GCSEs or A-levels before lockdown, they will most likely say they were difficult. I remember being in year 7 and speaking to the old years and asking them questions, and all they used to say to me is, make sure to relax and have fun in year 7, because when it gets to GCSEs and A-levels, you'll be way too stressed to even think about spending time with your friends or family. But little did I know that GCSEs weren't going to be difficult, they were going to be hell compared to what they experienced. Having to sit at home for countless hours, not having any access to proper sort of educational space like Teams or Google until the second lockdown, and even then, having to sit in front of a screen. Feeling isolated and caged in, having no support. There was a huge lack of communication regarding our education, which is why we felt so unprepared when we were thrown back into school. Have you ever tried to run a marathon without any training? Imagine how hard it would be. Well, that's how we felt. All of this time, we are always going to be catching up on. To sit and think that my first ever exam is going to be A-levels scares me. I have no practice other than a few mocks to get me to the level at which my teachers are expecting of me already. We missed out not only on our education, but our childhood milestones. When speaking to my friends, a lot of them said that their mental health, a lot like mine, plummeted. It felt really bad, and it felt like they had nobody to talk to. Not one family member, not one friend. You're probably thinking, what about social media? The preconception of social media, as much as it is a social space, we all know it can be very hard and very easy to hide the truth. And the truth is that nobody in COVID felt safe enough to reach out to one family member. It felt like we were caged, and our anxiety started to build up. We talk about how COVID hasn't physically affected many young people, how we carry it, but not that the pandemic that we are affected by is anxiety, which is flooding this generation, the generation of the future. We already have pressure on us to look a certain way and to be a certain way by social media. But then trying to think about our future, sometimes we just want the world to stop. It was like everyone is going through a similar situation, so it wasn't really a big deal. I wish that there could have been more funds for places like OTR or Couth, or any place in which young people could talk about their feelings. Most people describe to me that they never really felt anxiety, or anxiety at that level. You see people who are confined to 4 walls in prison, who go crazy. That's how we felt, having to think and feel every emotion. And with anxiety came the fear of the future, having no control of where we were going and what was going to happen. Are exams cancelled? Am I going back to school? Or what is the point? We ended up being not motivated to do anything. You probably hear stories about students in their pajamas on a Teams or Zoom class, but that isn't because we were lazy. It's because we felt punished for doing nothing. Every day was the same, so every day was a struggle to get out of bed, because we had nothing to strive for or to look forward to. From a young age, being successful was drummed into us, but success is different for everyone, and that's why I'm so grateful for Speakers for Schools. During lockdown, I felt like I was going nowhere in life, and I had nothing to strive for. After one virtual work experience, I already felt like the gap I had felt was being closed. Because before, all I knew was university. I didn't know about the multiple different career routes I could take. Nothing better inspires young people than the direct sharing of advice and experience. And hearing from people from around the globe who are sitting in front of me on my screen gave me time to think about the opportunities and potential I did have. It made me want to reach for a goal, made me realize I was more than just GCSEs or an A-level. Virtual work experiences is so amazing because everyone can access it, no matter your background or where you come from. Without it, I would never be thinking of a career in engineering. But there are still more things like this that can be done to help students. And the first action has been already taken by the few people in this room. Just like I did, by listening to others' experiences and getting a better understanding of how we experience the pandemic is that step. Because as young people, who don't quite yet have the right to vote, we put our trust in you, and to continue that trust, we have to feel heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly powerful. I don't know if you noticed, but I had, well, certainly Andrew and Jonathan, I think Gillian too, scribbling furiously as you were talking, writing down the various things you were saying and making sure that they took that back to Parliament. So thank you for joining us. Gillian, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry that you're stuck in traffic, but really thrilled to have you here. Do you want to say a few words, perhaps from your experience as Skills Minister in the last few years? I know you just got your feet under the table in your new role, but on your perspective, and then we'll go into Q&A. I know you need to shoot off in about 10 minutes. So we'll do
about 5:15 actually.
Oh, right.
It comes to something when the shortest queue you're in is actually the queue for petrol today. Apologies for that. And it was really interesting. Well, I'm sorry, I just caught a bit of Jonathan. I missed somebody else, but at least I caught Sophia. Is it Sophia?
Yeah.
Sophia's. And actually really interesting hearing what looks like your lifeline, which was Speakers for Schools, and effectively that was people who were giving you their experiences of all their different journeys. And I guess what it did is open up the understanding of, first of all, the plethora of opportunities, and also the myriad of different journeys that people use to get to their endpoint. And I think it's really important to put that into perspective, because sometimes when you're in school, it narrows into thinking it's all about GCSEs, A-levels, and there's this one conveyor belt. And in my last job, what I spent, which was the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills, what I spent most of my time doing was trying to broaden the understanding and awareness of the massive variety of opportunities there are for young people now, which mainly you don't get to know about. And one of the things that we're introducing is careers from year 7, which are real experiences with businesses, both virtual and real, to try and replicate what you got while you were sat there with Speakers for Schools and virtual career fairs. Because once you see that, first of all, I think the anxiety goes down a little bit because it puts it into context. But secondly, it gets exciting, all the things that really are there. And the thing that you should be most excited about is the skills shortages. Whilst it hasn't been such a great week in terms of the impact on petrol and you know, obviously some of the supply chains, but there are skills shortages in pretty much every part of our country. And pretty much every business, I've worked in business for many years before being an MP, is desperate for you and for all your colleagues and all of your, you know, can't wait for you to finish school or finish your study. And obviously the degree level and high level apprenticeships are there for you to use that route as well. And there are more and more using them because they need you very quickly. So, and all the things that you offer to a business. So never underestimate what you have to offer, and obviously how much you'll be welcomed once you join the business world. Now my new role, which I started 2 weeks ago, is the Minister for Care, which is social care, and mental health. And they didn't used to be together, but they've been put together in this new role, which, as I say, was 2 weeks ago. So I think it's fair to say I'm still getting used to it and used to the brief. I'm far more familiar with the apprenticeships and skills brief. But if I was passionate about apprenticeships and skills, which I am because I did a degree apprenticeship and I knew the power of apprenticeships 30 odd years ago, particularly if, like me, you're sat in a comprehensive school in a working class area, whether it's Stoke or Knowsley, where I grew up, thinking, how the hell do I get from here to anywhere in life? You know, it looks like every avenue, you couldn't even do A-levels in our school, so there was, every avenue was kind of blocked, and there was nowhere else you could do them either in Knowsley at the time. It's much better now. But if that's, you know, also something I'm very passionate about, the other thing that really impacts young people, and that's my passion, effectively young people, and giving them a chance in life and all the opportunities in life, the other thing is mental health. And there has been a very big change, I think, in mental health and the impact of mental health. You mentioned, Sophie, about this anxiety, uncertainty, and it kind of fuels each other. All of the things you're uncertain about, partly through lots of options, partly through not understanding how to get to the options, and then also I think the lens of social media, which a lot of people used to say to me, you know, growing up in Knowsley and going to a comprehensive school, you know, wasn't that really hard? And I said, well, not really, because everybody around me was exactly the same. I didn't have the rich kids of Instagram show me their gold Ferraris, or somebody else showed me they were, you know, 3 foot taller or 3 stone lighter, or didn't have spots or whatever it is. I didn't have that. I just had every kid around me pretty much the same as me, with pretty much the same experiences, to be honest. And there was something about that I found comforting, that actually I think, even though later on I realised that we probably were quite deprived, it was a comfort because we were all the same. And I think that has gone for your generation, and I think that's something that from a mental health perspective, it's really important. The thing I've understood, and you get this when you get a bit older, is mental health obviously impacts everybody. And I think every one of us is only 1 or 2 steps away from a mental health crisis. A couple of things that go wrong together at the wrong time. And I've seen this in my own family. My sister-in-law was sectioned about a year after she gave birth, because that didn't go as planned, and she kind of struggled on for a bit, but then she just broke down. I've had another cousin who unfortunately committed suicide, and now I meet many people whose young kids have committed suicide, particularly men, not exclusively. My cousin was a girl, she was 26, but it does seem to be particularly men up to the age of about 25, and that's just tragic because of course every suicide is also preventable. If only you could be there, or the circumstances that need people to have that. Some mum described it to me, it was like a heart attack for the brain, which I thought was such a good way of putting it. It's just like something that happens very suddenly, and if you get the right support. So over the past 18 months, obviously people's mental health has been stretched to breaking point. Not only our young people, but I think particularly our young people. They've had such a hard time. I mean, they've missed out on everything, actually, all of the... And it ranges, doesn't it? It ranges from the trip that you go with your friends, your first sort of week away, your prom, your exams, your celebrations, your festivals, your open days to university, all of that preparation, all of that gliding you into, hand-holding almost you into, or celebrating the end of all the achievements that you've had. And that loss is very difficult to get back, and that's the other thing I think that people also feel, it's been extremely isolating and caged. I actually wrote here that many young people feel that their wings have been clipped just when they're about to take off, but caged is actually what like a caged bird in a way. Your wings are clipped about to take off, but you actually are in a cage, which and as much as people love their family, assuming that they're in a good place with their family, it does get old every day, doesn't it? I mean, I think all of us felt that, it does get a bit samey every day, and not being able to see other people, and certainly people in your own age. So I think it has been extremely challenging. Now, what are we going to do about it is, I think, the key question. And there's two questions that I would look at, and I look at in relation to both aspects of my new role. First is care. We have never in this country designed a care system for our elderly and working age adults, because we have many more people living with complex conditions up much longer. I have a nephew with Down syndrome. That used to be something that people didn't live beyond their 50s. Now, he's expected to live a full life and will need possibly extra care as he gets towards the end of his life. But we've never actually designed a system for the ageing society that we have, which is the ageing society of people getting older and living to much longer lives. Because what used to happen is people either died younger, either because they had terrible jobs, actually, often. My granddad was a coal miner, he didn't last much into his 70s, and many people had kind of quite hard lives, actually, and died before their time. Or, if they did live longer, they lived with their families and people looked after each other, because people stayed more local and stayed closer to each other. I have another grandmother who did get dementia, and she had 13 children. Well, she had her own care system, basically. They all looked after her. She didn't have to move from her council house because, everyone lived within a few miles and they looked after her. That's not very sustainable. So we have to design that system. It's the same with mental health. We've said, we want parity of esteem between physical health and mental health. We've been building our physical health system, our NHS, since 1948, and we're continuously building it. We're continuously improving aspects of it, and it is fantastic. When you look at the hospitals we have, the care that we get, the medical interventions that help us live longer, and compare that to 20 and 30 years ago, it is astonishing. But we haven't done that for mental health. And just because you say you want parity of esteem, which is true, the first thing is, how do we build it? And I was talking to my goddaughter last night, who was actually trying to be a clinician in this area. She was discussing how difficult it was, and she's at university, she's at Bath, just how difficult it was to find the roots, like you were saying, to find the roots into mental health professional sort of jobs. So I think there's a lot of work that we have to do. Now the good news is we've got more money going into both of those aspects, 2.3 billion additional funding a year, which will be invested into mental health services by 2022 and 23. We've also had a children's and young people's mental health green paper to look at what are the services that we need. We know they're not good enough today. There's over £300 million of funding that's going behind that. There's some difference, there's the lower level interventions and prevention work, a lot of which could be done in schools with trained professionals in schools, and that's something that we are very much considering with our wellbeing for education recovery, but also with teams of people who will look at education and mental health and what's the right model for schools. But of course then there's much more serious, and many people will know people now with very serious self-harm or eating disorder. And again, my daughter's sister had that experience, which was a dreadful experience for all concerned for many, many years. And that's when you definitely need the beds, and you need them very quickly. So we're putting more money into trying to get more beds. But it is the extent to the need compared to when you were growing up is massive. It's massive. It's really, really grown. And I don't know what's behind that, but I suspect there'll be some elements of social media and people feeling a lack of control of lots of aspects of their life. So it's a massive, massive brief, but I guess there is no shortage of ambition for us to do the right thing. The question in a lot of things when it comes to government, I found this in the other role as well, is you want to make sure that every penny actually hits the spot in terms of really goes to use and really helps the young person. That's actually the challenge of implementing pretty much any policy, because you're up there and actually the person who really needs it. You don't really, it's hard to even measure whether the person really got the help that they needed until probably a year later when you get all those lagging data. So that's the key thing, but working with the sector to try and do that. There's something I went to, I've already been on 4 visits actually. And I was in Liverpool, I'm from Liverpool, so Mum and Dad are still there, and I went to a mental health centre there. And funnily enough, met a girl from my school who worked there, which was quite bizarre. But what they had done is they'd all kind of worked together. So you had the CCG, you had a lot of community services, you had the Alder Hey mental health services, you had the council, and they were all working together, and they were introducing this as a massive breakthrough, the Liverpool model. And I sat there and said, what stopped you working together before? What stopped you all working together, pooling resources, putting a hub in place, making it available for young people? Nothing stops that, and it's almost the answer to pretty much every problem I see in government. If you all work together, because everybody owns little bits of it, to actually focus on the people who need the help, segment it, young people or old people or whatever it is that makes sense with the right facilities, then that's something that would really massively help young people in this case, because it was focused on young people. And it seemed to be a brilliant model, so we're looking at that. But I was quite astonished that this was a breakthrough, working together to actually solve it, putting all the resources together and making sure it's focused on what the young person needs. So we'll be doing a lot more of that, and and I'm very much looking forward to working with all of the groups. Most people in this sector have a lot of lived experience. So like we heard from Sophia, then listening to people's real experience gives you the ability to really solve the problems and hopefully come up with a much better offer than we have today. And learning a lot from the pandemic, I think, as well, in terms of support that's needed.
Gillian, thank you so much. It's brilliant to be able to hear from you so early on in the role, actually. And I know that you're only 2 weeks in, but just really struck by the depth of knowledge and actually some of your own lived experience as well, which I know you brought to your previous role, but it's brilliant to see you bring that.
It's the benefit of being so old, I guess. And such a big family.
So we've got just over 10 minutes left, and I'm going to go straight to the floor for questions, if that's right. I do have some pre-prepared questions if people are too shy, but let's see, we have a few. I'm going to take 2 at a time, if that's all right. So could I go at the back, and then I'll come to you at the front, if that's okay. Can you say who you are and where you're coming from?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Adol. I'm from the CDI, but here in Classic. We talked about the importance of contextualising learning and the desire of young people to practice their skills. And I think work experience is a really important part of relating in providing those opportunities. But I wanted to ask about how we can build more opportunities within the education system itself for young people to undertake a variety of stuff. Because I think kind of having we've talked about or experiences bolted on in the workplace are really, really crucial. But I think kind of having a chance to do that on a more kind of regular basis in schools, throughout your time in education, I think will be really
from when I came in, sorry I was late, that a lot of people in the Conservative Party are older and therefore it doesn't affect them. Most of us have children that are about age, with their mums, with their dads. It does affect us. And the two main things that affected my daughter, and I don't know about England, but I live in Scotland, and it was a month before the exams. They cancelled the exams. I would like everyone in this room, when they get home, spend 1 minute imagining that when you were 17. And then you might understand. I mean, I don't think they understand how bad that is. I don't think you get how different that is. Suddenly being told everything you've worked for from the age of, say, 3 at nursery to 18, everything you've worked for just cancelled a month before the exam. So I'd like you all to do that. Spend 1 minute when you get home imagining what you were like a month before your exams and they get cancelled. And the other thing is, my daughter's 18. She has friends and relatives that are 17 and they drive around like anyone's business. My daughter works, she's got a responsible job. Even during this conference, my husband's having to stop work and drive her. She's 18, she's got a really good job. She needs a lift, don't go on. That's not nice. I wouldn't like that. So that's my question, is can you spend 1 minute when you get home and really imagine, if you want to understand how young people feel, and also I think young people need to understand, you're going through hell. It's a lot worse than you think. You're trying to take it in your stride. You've no idea how great it is to do your exams and pass with flying colours.
Thank you.
And also people that wouldn't normally do well in exams, they're getting it on. There's no difference.
Thank you for your question and for sharing some of your experiences. Could I also, I think, Josh, if I could take a question from you as well, and then I'll come back to the panel.
My name is Josh. I'm here on behalf of Speak for Schools representing young people. As a young person, I know that both my peers and I struggled to access support during the pandemic and even afterwards, specifically mental health support. And we know that young people in the UK don't all, they were all in some way negatively impacted by the pandemic. What we also know is that not all young people in the UK have access to support post-pandemic. So my question would be, what are the government going to do to ensure that all young people in the UK have access to support and the necessary opportunities post-pandemic?
Thank you very much, Josh. Okay, I'm going to split up the questions to different members of the panel just in the interest of time. So our first question was particularly about applied learning within school. I might pose that question to Rachel and Jonathan, if that's all right, just as two people I know who've thought about that question a lot. Then our second question was about both older generations
Can you spend a minute?
and also can you spend a minute? So so if I could pose that perhaps to Andrew and potentially also to Sophia as well, if that was all right, just to talk a little bit about how it felt for you having your exams disrupted and kind of perhaps responding to the question. And then that final question from Josh about what's the government going to do? I think there's only one person on the panel who I should pose that to, and that's Gillian. So if I could come to Gillian last again, if that's all right. But Rachel, then Jonathan, Andrew, then Sophia, and then Gillian, if that's all right. So Rachel first.
Cool, thank you. Sorry, Corey from Super, I didn't get your first name, but on the applied learning, absolutely, and very good. And I think part of that is about the prep and the kind of the reflection afterwards in terms of work experience placement. Part of it has to be about doing more to support teachers. So there's some great stuff in the FE white paper about supporting FE lecturers and tutors and so on with placements in business, but actually every teacher should have the opportunity to spend time in business and to understand how their subject knowledge connects to the world of work. So we're keen to do much more on teacher externships and on getting teachers opportunities to work with business. But I think a work experience placement is most powerful, not only when you go on placement, when you have the opportunity to prepare both with your careers leader in school and subject teachers and to reflect afterwards as well. So absolutely, the connections between learning and the wider world and the world of work can be made throughout a school career. Project-based learning and lots of other interesting innovative models out there as well, but I think within any curriculum or a learning model you can make those connections throughout, and it's vital.
So it's fantastic, Rachel, and thank you, Vanessa, for your question. And Rachel mentioned project-based learning. I was trained to do project-based learning. Pete Patterson was the one, Vanessa, who trained me at Blackfen School for Girls in Bexley, and where Lola Blatch took over the department, still working there today. I've probably shifted far away from where I started as an ideology in teaching to probably the Kayla style now. Like, I've been on that journey where I tried to bring project-based learning to other schools, but ultimately why it succeeded at Blackfen was that the department was given the space and had the cover from the head teacher to do it. When I went into the department and I was a solo person, kids were coming going, why are we doing this? Like, they're not doing another class, just tell us what we need to know, we'll go away and learn it. So I think that was a learning experience for me as a teacher, which is why I probably get a bit more grumpier as a grumpy goddess, as I was well known by the students when I talked. And in terms of
really? And in Parliament.
I know, and in Parliament. Yeah. In terms of applied learning, absolutely, CPD in this country for teachers is teachers from a school, going to listen to the assistant head teachers from their school to talk about teaching models read from a book from someone who's probably never spent a day in their life in the classroom, but somehow is an expert in knowing how that classroom works. It's ridiculous. I'm so bored of lecturers telling me how to teach it. They've never actually spent more than a day in a classroom with a class of 30 of kids with different abilities from different backgrounds, and you're trying to make sure they're all progressing at a fast rate. So I don't like the lecturer angle there. So CPD by actually going to a business would be fantastic. I'd love that opportunity to actually go and learn, as well as actually going to visit other schools and seeing what they're doing, especially now with lots of the Multi-Academy Trust working with business and business sector coming in, there's a great opportunity there. I also think there's an aspect in the curriculum. I find it very bizarre with maths, for example, the GCSE, why is there not a module on accountancy? Why do we not have accountancy as part of the module and budgeting as part of that? It's easy enough to teach. It could be easily examined as part of the GCSE. You're still doing a proper exam, knowledge-based learning, but at the same time, then applying those skills to a scenario where someone's budget needs fixing and your job is to solve that problem. So ultimately, I think that's where we need to get opportunities within the curriculum to also allow that to hopefully move forward as well. But sorry, I see you're doing the finger point, which means I need to shut up, so I'm going to do that.
I'm just very conscious of time and people's busy diaries. Andrew, and then Sophia, please.
Yeah, so to address your point, I think everybody in this country should take a moment to think about how lockdown affected the youngest generation, especially those who were at school and who, within a month of sitting their first exams or their final exams at school, had the rug pulled from under them and left essentially in limbo. And you're absolutely right, and I don't think anybody has described it better than I heard Sophia powerfully. So the thing that I was writing down when you were speaking was hell, isolated, unprepared, missed out, prison, fear of failure, and anxiety. And I think there are far too many people out there in the country who simply don't understand what you have been going through at school or your daughter. Yeah. And sorry, please. And I think we have to recognise that. And this is what I said when I spoke earlier on. We have a responsibility to that generation to get the next steps right for them. They're going to inherit the decisions. The world that we give on to them will be as a result of the decisions that we take right now at this really important moment. So we have a responsibility to get it right. It's not easy. And on your point about driving around, I'm from Scotland as well. West Aberdeenshire is my constituency. I grew up in Aberdeenshire, and at 17 years old, the very first thing I wanted, my birthday present was driving around. So a very rural part of the country, to get your own car, to have that freedom to be able to go and do what you want, drive yourself to work or go out or whatever it is. And it's one of the unspoken about elements of this lockdown is that there is now a whole, there are millions of kids out there, 17, 18 years old, who are now having to wait forever to get their driving lessons and then sit their driving tests. And that element of being able to go and do that freedom that you get through the simple thing of having a driving license, has been taken away, which is just another element of the disruption that they face as a generation. Absolutely, everybody should take a minute to think about how hard this past year or so has been for the younger generation. And obviously, parents, grandparents, and have been experiencing that and living that with their kids and their grands through the past year. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, we're running out of time, and I want to bring Sophia in and Gillian. So, Sophia, do you just want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, so lockdown first started for me when I was in year 10, and so I was about to do my mocks a month in, and so I just thought, okay, as soon as I get to home, we're going to start revising. And I remember for 6 months straight doing 8 hours of work every single day, thinking, okay, I'm going to have my GCSEs in year 11, I want to be prepared. And then a couple months before I was meant to go sit them, they were just pulled under the rug for me. And I remember sitting in my living room crying to my parents saying, I've worked so hard for something and it's just been taken away from me, and I cannot prove that I've actually done this. And then hearing my friends all laughing and being like so happy that they don't have to work as hard for it anymore, and feeling that I'm not going to be able to show that I showed what I actually did at home, and they did nothing. So after that I did 3 months straight of exams, spending every single night, every single day, just making sure that I did get the grades and that I was able to show that the work I put in was there. I was able to get, luckily for me, I was able to get all straight A's at the end of it, which was amazing. But then it was like some other people who I didn't see work as hard as me got the same grade, and it didn't feel like I earned it enough. But that was just my experience, and a lot of other people felt the same.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you for being so open about your experiences. Gillian, I'm really conscious of your diary, and I know we're already running over, but do you want to just very quickly address Josh's question?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it, to make sure that we have the support structure in place as quickly as possible, because there was some stuff in place, but not enough, and certainly not for the scale of the amount of young people that everybody actually needed it. And that kind of, well, Sophie's described it very well, but we'll want to do something very similar as well. So we have done a number of things to try and help. So the first is the mental health support teams in schools. Now, unfortunately, I had to be in school to have those. So that was the first thing, making sure everyone got back to school. And I think that in itself did give a massive boost. But then, putting these mental health support teams, which aren't all there at the moment. There's going to be about 25% of the schools will have them, coming in the near term, but then we'll roll them out everywhere. And that's really to be able to deal with some of the lower level, anxiety and prevention as well. There's also Public Health England did launch a free online psychological first aid training course, so that's for anyone dealing with young people to be able to very quickly get themselves into a position where they could cope and try and help you cope. And then for young people in particular, there's Every Mind Matters website, which is there, and it does provide some guidance and tools and support. But then the more important thing is the services that are required, where somebody has got to the point where they need that extra support. We'll put more money in, there'll be another 345,000 places for young people to try and, we want to get to people as soon as we can, because obviously the sooner you can get to people, the sooner you can help and help their recovery and put their mental health in a good space. And if you don't, then it gets much worse. So that's the challenge we have at the moment to try. But the big challenge, I think, is going to come. I haven't looked at this in detail, but it will be enough trained people to actually really help with those more serious CBT and above interventions. And I think that's going to be the challenge. And you can't create them out of nowhere. That's a different.
Please support Gillian with that. This is not just a UK issue. This is actually a global issue. With the lack of qualified people, it's a global problem. So Gillian's task is not small by any means.
No.
As ever in politics, problems come back to a lack of qualified people.
Yeah, always actually. That's why the skills is the most important.
Indeed. So we are over time, and I'm conscious that the people will need to go on to other things. So thank you so much. I'm not going to try and sum up. Could everyone just please give a round of applause for our brilliant